Hello and welcome to ThePrint. At a time when all India services is passing through a crucial phase with lots of amendments being brought and lots of changes are being made. So you have written a trilogy on the service. So we have a very respected IAS officer with us today, Mr. Anil Swarup. He has held very important positions like Coal Secretary, Education Secretary. Also back in his cadre in Uttar Pradesh, he has held substantial charges. So welcome to ThePrint, sir. Sir, first we would like to start this interview, on your observation, about the present situation in the civil services. Like lot being spoken about the services nowadays. It's about the IAS cadre rule amendment that is being brought. It hasn't been implemented yet, but it's a lot of discussion are going on. So if you can, say something about it.
See, first of all, this is nothing new about the Indian Administrative Service. It has been undergoing a lot of changes over the years, over the decades, ever since independence. And now also it's happening, and it should happen. In fact, in any society, in any governance systems, the civil service has to undergo changes. One may agree or disagree, that's a different matter to a particular change. One may agree or disagree with the pace at which it is happening. But certainly changes are required because the civil services have to evolve with the needs of the hour. What is the role that it has to play now? Obviously, the role that the Indian Administrative Service played in the initial couple of decades in India was different from the role that it has to play now. A lot has changed. So indeed, things are changing now. But what you allude to are the rule changes in the context of what is happening between the states and the center.
Yes.
And as you are aware that All India services, they occupy a slightly different position as compared to the state services and central services. Whereas an officer appointed to the state services is directly responsible to the state government. Officer appointed to the central service is directly responsible to the central government. All India services occupy a unique position. They are recruited by the central government. They are appointed by the central government. But then they are assigned to the state government and they work with the state government. Till such time they come on deputation, and that's the term that is used when an All India service officer who's assigned to a state comes to the center. So their primary employment in that sense is the state government, because they are not on deputation to the state government, they are on deputation to the central government. Now this relationship or all the conditions in which the All India service officers worked pretty smoothly. I mean, there were differences of opinion on occasions. But thanks to some of the events that have happened in the larger context of what I started calling the war between the center and the state, the All India services have got caught in this crossfire between the center and states, which is very unfortunate. It shouldn't have happened because All India services bring in the desired balance of governance between the center and the state. So the enormous experience that an All India service officer has in the states while working in the field holds him in good stead when he comes to center for policy formulation and other things. So this balance somehow is getting disturbed now on account of events like what happened in West Bengal and otherwise. There is some sense both at the center and the state that the service belongs to them only, which is untrue.
Yep.
Service belongs to both. In fact, in a unique federal structure that this country has, All India services, they play a very, very important role in providing that connect between the center and the state. Now, if the All India service officers are treated as state government officers, then that connect would be lost. If they are exclusively treated as the officers of the central government, then that connect would be lost. So this is the connect that they bring between the center and the state. Unfortunately, the sagacity that probably some of the leaders had earlier, that seems to be missing because they are fighting like kids. It shouldn't happen.
So, sir, since you have spent 38 years of your life, like I would not say spend, but I would say that you have given 38 years of your life, to this celebrated service, the most celebrated service of India. So, and you have also written like 3 books. It's kind of a trilogy on the service to dissect, to deconstruct the service for all of us. So, sir, why do you think that, the civil service officers, they are also, I mean, I would not say all of them, but many of them, they are really unwilling to come to center. It's not always the state government who is pulling them back, but it's their willingness also.
There are all types, there are some officers who would want to come to center but are not being relieved by the state governments. There are other officers who don't want to come to center. It should be their, I would believe that it would be their personal view, and I can only conjecture about why they don't want to come to the center. Let me give you my own example. When I was working the state government, I never wanted to come to the central government because I was enjoying my life there. I was enjoying my job there. I was enjoying every moment there. I was virtually pushed into coming to the center. It was when I came to the center that I realized the value of working at the central government, and the canvas that he had is much broader than what he did in the state government. So there could be a variety of reasons because of the comfort level that the officers enjoy in the state government. Central government physical comforts, of course, are not as much as you get in the state governments. Yeah. So that could be one of the reasons. But if I were to talk to them, and I do interact with them, and I tell them that you are missing out on a huge opportunity of working for Government of India, and thereby also getting yourself exposed to a larger canvas, which will hold you in good stead in future. And I give my own personal experience that I was initially reluctant to come here, but once I came here, I loved working here as well.
Then you didn't want to go back, but you had to go back, I believe.
I went back for 3 years.
Yes.
In between. Frankly speaking, over a period of time, as I've written in my book, Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant, Not Just a Civil Servant, in both these books I've written very clearly that I became indifferent to the assignment that came to me. I took the assignment, whichever assignment came to me. And in fact, in 38 years of my career, I never tried for any assignment. I went along with whatever came my way, and I thoroughly enjoyed them. And the idea was to make the best of the opportunities available. And my experience tells me in 38 years that you do have enormous amount of opportunities in all the assignments that I had.
So do you really think that civil service is still the steel frame of the governance in India? Or do you think that spine is suffering from some sort of spinal disorder?
I'm totally convinced that it is still the steel frame of India. There are problems. There were problems. Probably, comparatively speaking, you can say there are more problems now, but still the steel frame, because it is that frame that holds us together. I mean, initially when I was talking about the All India services, providing that connect between the center and the state, that's so very important to hold it together. So in a federal structure like ours, I would still believe that it is difficult. As I write, it's not easy. It's a difficult job.
Yeah.
As I write in the initial part of my book, Ethical Dilemma, I say, मुख्तसर सी जिंदगी के अजब से अफसाने हैं.
Your book starts with the couplet.
तीर भी चलाने हैं, परिंदे भी बचाने हैं. So it's not easy, but then civil servants play a very, very important role in keeping not only the country together and moving things around. This is not to say there are not problems with the civil service. There are indeed problems. There were problems. There are problems now. The nature may have changed. The quantum may have increased. But nonetheless, they provide that framework.
Sir, in your third book, you have mentioned about how Prime Minister's office functions. Like you have said that this is the pivot of the governance. This is the epicenter of power. So how does it control everything? Does it really control everything, like all the ministries, and how it is different from Dr. Manmohan Singh's PMO?
See, Prime Minister's office were always very important.
Yes.
It's not that they've suddenly become important. But since I had the occasion to work with previous governments and this one,
yes,
comparatively speaking, I would believe that it is much more centralized now. For the simple reason that earlier, I think cabinet ministers did take a lot of decisions. I'm not saying they were right, wrong, good, bad or ugly. I'm not passing a value judgment. I'm only stating a fact as I perceived at that point in time working in Government of India. I used to feel that cabinet ministers were fairly free to take their own decisions. They are free even now, but there is a tendency to refer everything to the PMO. And I have given some examples in my book, not only No More a Civil Servant, even before that in Ethical Dilemmas. I give an instance when CBSE exam paper leak happened. For that, in order to hold a press conference, we had to go to PMO. I mean, I was wondering why should we go to PMO and seek PMO's approval, so to say, for holding a press conference. That's in 2018. But my minister said that, no, let's discuss to the PMO. I'm giving one such example. But there are many such examples where I would now believe, and even that point in time, I used to say, why unnecessarily trouble the PMO? A PMO has a role to play, a very important role to play. But why should, things like holding a press conference should go to the PMO? So I do feel that in the present government, there is a lot of centralization with the PMO. I don't think it's formally mandated, But that's how it has evolved. I don't think there is a directive that you should consult the PMO. There's no rule or directive in that sense. But the manner in which it has evolved is that there is a tendency to refer things to PMO. That's how it has evolved.
Why such a tendency, sir? It's a strange tendency, but then is there any unsaid rule that you have to take permission?
I don't think there is. I mean, in 4 years as Secretary Government of India, I never came across any rule that it should go to PMO. And I, for one, used to do things on my own as co-secretary. I mean, again, there is a chapter in the book which I actually took on the PMO,
Yes, I read
so to say. So I used to wonder that we should go to PMO where we require some guidance or clarification, which we should if we have to. But otherwise, why keep troubling the PMO all the time? But that's how it evolved. Reason very difficult to put my finger on. Probably there is a tendency to keep control over everything, because in fact, I was asked on occasions that you don't monitor. I said, I'm not a monitor, I'm a facilitator. And not many people understood this term. In coal, in the beginning, they used to tell me, you monitor. I said, what should I monitor? Monitor means that I'm wiser than the person I'm monitoring, or I have greater knowledge or experience. I neither had knowledge in coal, nor experience in coal, nor I thought I was wise. So what I used to tell my counterparts in Coal India, the chairman Coal India, I used to tell him, you tell me how can I help you? Rather than me poking my nose in everything that he was doing. And that worked, actually. We had record coal production because we defined our rules. We defined what we have to do in the government, and Coal India did what it did. So we were not interfering with each other's work, but we were working in tandem, helping each other to increase coal production, and it worked. So facilitation worked. But there is this sometimes tendency, and some of us are, we have that problem with us. We want to monitor. We want to keep control. Any officer, my approach was very different. Any officer who's put in 24, 25 years in service as an officer, he's empaneled as Joint Secretary Government of India, he should be given responsibility to carry on his task. I should not be breathing down his neck and keep telling him, do this, do that. No. I used to hate if someone kept directing me doing things. Same thing when I became Secretary Government of India. I said, everyone should I should be able to delegate power to him and give him that space to work. It worked. It worked brilliantly because, in 4 years as Secretary Government of India, except the 3 months that I spent as Coal Secretary, initially there was crisis. I used to return home at 6 o'clock in the evening. I used to leave the office at 6 o'clock because I managed to delegate, and I loved that. The officers I thought loved that because they delivered. So it's a question of how you approach, your attitude, what makes.
So, sir, do you think that the space for thinking independently or deciding independently for ministers and for bureaucrats also, has that space shrunk, or is it shrinking?
I would believe that. I believe that a lot of space has indeed been occupied by the PMO, which as I said, there's no rule, but that's how it has evolved. Either ministries have themselves conceded that space to the PMO, or PMO has occupied it. I can't really say how it would work, but fact of the matter is that PMO is playing a much more prominent role, and they have occupied a lot more space than I would think they should occupy.
Prominent or controlling role. Yeah. And sir, with this, I would just want to add a lot of cabinet decisions, a lot of policy decisions we see, like let's say, for instance, the farm law. So the decision was taken and then the government had to roll back. So do you think that there wasn't enough space to even debate or discuss or deliberate, among ministers or among officers?
I don't really know what happened in the debates because I was not a part of that.
No, I'm
debate.
That's
what I would believe as an outsider, because I saw farm laws as an outsider, and I had the occasion to study the farm laws, and I personally felt that they were good for the farmers.
Right.
They were for the benefit of the farmer. Then I tried to analyze what exactly went wrong, again as an outsider, and my reading was very simple. I have written in my book that for any idea, and farm laws were articulation of an idea, to fructify and sustain over a period of time, it has to be politically acceptable, socially desirable, technologically feasible, financially viable, administratively doable, judicially tenable, and I added the 7th frame of emotionally relatable. Now what is that? That's where farm laws failed, because they were politically acceptable, socially desirable, everything was there. What it failed was that it failed to convince the stakeholders into believing that it had value for them. And in order to do that, you have to engage in a conversation with them.
Right.
Let me give a parallel example of GST. GST was much more complex as compared to farm laws. But what happened in GST was constant and intensive engagement with the stakeholders, including state governments. And that is why over a period of time, the states came to accept it. That's the emotional relatability part. They could relate to it emotionally, that there is a value proposition in the GST that was happening. I don't think that happened in the farm laws. You know, the fact of farm laws being pushed in Rajya Sabha actually was the last straw. Because I wondered at that point in time, if the law is so good, which I thought was very good, why not have a debate on it? Heavens will not fall if it gets debated in Rajya Sabha. Heavens will not fall if it goes to a standing committee where further deliberation with stakeholders could happen. It would have gone through. So what happened in farms law, to my mind, was probably the reluctance to engage in an intensive dialogue with the stakeholders, which happened in GST. Now, this government succeeded in a much more complex law and it's working very well. But in farm laws, it failed because it, for some reason, it pushed it. Now, I don't know about the internal dynamics, what happened internally in the government, but that's my perception as an outsider.
Sir, I wasn't really talking about the farm laws. Farm laws is just an example. I was just trying to understand about the policy decisions. Like whatever policy decision the government takes. So if there is enough space to, as you also mentioned, to discuss, to debate or to deliberate. So then you do not really, the government doesn't really need to, go back on those kind of.
Absolutely.
So is that space still there?
No, you see, it's very difficult to pass a sweeping judgment on that. So, for example, I can only tell you about my example or as an outsider. When we did coal block auction, that was also a policy. We had very intensive discussions, series of discussions with all the stakeholders, and it worked so smoothly even in the crisis point of view. And that was not only the case. There are many other decisions that we took where we did consult with stakeholders. And this government is credited with holding such consultations. I gave one example of GST. So it is not that it does not consult anybody in it doesn't happen that way. In a large number of cases, I know for sure, they have been engaging with the stakeholders. Farm law was one such example which I felt, and I don't know whether I'm right or wrong, where probably the engagement that should have happened didn't happen.
So, sir, nowadays, again, I'm coming back to the service. So, do you really think the service you mentioned that it's evolving. So, do you really think it's evolving or it's, at some point it's devolving also? Because we are seeing a lot of bureaucrats, immediately after retirement, they are joining politics. There is no cooling off period. So, does it affect
I have written about it in two of my books, Ethical Dilemma as well as No More a Civil Servant.
They're fighting
and
elections.
my personal view is very clear on that. I'm clear that democratically speaking, legally speaking, there is nothing wrong in a civil servant joining politics. And why shouldn't he join politics? My reservation is only with regard to constitutional positions. And let me explain this to you why I say that. In a constitutional position like election commission, in a constitutional position like a judge of a Supreme Court, they hold positions where they take decisions. They are the ultimate decision maker. So though it's not legally wrong, in my personal view, it is ethically incorrect for a judge or an election commissioner to take a government assignment after he retires.
Immediately after.
As far as government servants are concerned, anyone who knows how governance happens, civil servants may be the recommending authorities, but they're not the decision-making authorities. The final decision in policy or major decision is done by the politician. So though you can influence a decision to benefit somebody, you're not the final decision maker. Whereas in a constitutional authority, whether election commission or judge, you are the decision maker. So take this classic example of Justice Gogoi. It's a classic example of Justice Gogoi. When I wrote this book, Ethical Dilemmas of Civil Servant, after this event happened and people asked me, why are you talking of ethics? And I agree with them. No, whatever has happened in case of Justice Gogoi was not legally wrong, but it was ethically wrong. Imagine a scenario, a Supreme Court sitting judge holds a press conference against a sitting Chief Justice of India and is not hauled up for contempt. He is made Chief Justice of India. And then there is a sexual harassment case against him in which there is a compromise. How can there be a compromise in a sexual harassment case? If the person who's complained has made a wrong complaint, action should have been taken against her. And if she said what was right, then action should have been taken against Google.
Yeah.
There can't be a compromise in a sexual harassment case, but there was a compromise. And to crown it all, he becomes member of parliament.
Immediately after his
Now, judge becoming a member of parliament, there is nothing illegal in it. Absolutely. But is it ethical? These are the questions that, disturb you a bit. So, I am not personally against officers joining politics. I am certainly against them doing politics while in service. But I am not against they joining politics after they, whether they resign or they leave it. It's good. They have a particular bent of mind. Let them join politics. But I am certainly not in favor of people holding constitutional positions joining politics. And this is nothing new. I mean, it's not happening now. There was a chief election commissioner who joined a particular political party and became a cabinet minister.
Yeah.
So it's not one political party or second political party. As a society, we have to debate whether it is in the interest of governance of this country or not.
Sir, how do you look at this changing scenario or the changing relationship between the political executives and the bureaucrats? Like, do you really think the civil servants are now more, they are somehow being more politically influenced or motivated?
No, you see, there is no empirical evidence. These are all, we come across anecdotal evidence that this civil servant, there's no empirical. But let me analyze it on a larger spectrum as to how I look at it. There is no necessity for a civil servant to be politically biased. There's no necessity. If he does become biased for some return in favor, then it's his problem. It's not the problem of the system. Today, the system allows you to give your advice freely and frankly. And in case you are overruled, and the overruled decision is not against law, it's your job to implement it. So as a pure professional, a civil servant has to provide the right professional advice to the boss, giving the details. And if he gets overruled, and the overruled decision is not against law, then it's his job to implement it. Then he can't bring in his own ideology and say this is right and this is wrong. No. The only right and wrong for a civil servant is in the context of laws that prevail, if it is contrary to law. Now, this is easier said than done. In case there is a clear-cut law laid down, you can get away with it. But a large number of decisions are in the grey area, where you can't really say this is right and wrong. That's where the ethical dilemma comes in. The entire book, Ethical Dilemmas, is based on the grey area where law is not clear. Where law is clear, I don't think there is any doubt, because if a civil servant goes by the directive of a politician, which is illegal, then he will also pay a price. There have been past instances in the past, and he'll pay a price. But if he says something which is not contrary to law, there is a grey area and you have to interpret it, then my advice to officers is, then lay down a criteria. So that in future, anyone who fulfills that criteria also get benefit out of the decision that gets taken. I don't think any civil servant will come to grief if he follows this. But civil servants who do come to grief are those that toe the line irrespective of the law. That's where the problem is.
Sir, like a lot of new things are being, implemented. So one is probably the 360 survey. So there is a lot of controversy, lot of discussion, some sort of reasonment also. How do you look at it? I mean,
see, again, I have written about 360-degree in my book, Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant, and the idea is very good. Sometimes the ideas are good, but the way they are implemented. This 360-degree has been borrowed from the private sector. But the manner in which it happens in the private sector doesn't happen in the government. In private sector, it's a transparent system of 360-degree evaluation. In government, it's totally opaque. I'll give you examples.
Very opaque.
I tell you, I was Secretary Government of India and I was visiting Ladakh. And I was traveling in an interior area. I get a call from somebody who's in that panel of 360 evaluation. And he asked me, Anil, you have worked with this officer. How is this officer? No, it depends totally on my mood, how at that point in time I have a mood, and I'll say good, bad or ugly. And that's how future of an officer is determined. In private sector, the entire panel sits together, discusses that officer at length, then talks to that officer, calls that officer, have an interaction with him. And then if he is not considered to be fit, they have another exchange with him to tell him what they think is wrong with him. Nothing of that sort happens here. People don't know what has hit them. They've done wonderfully well in their entire career, and suddenly they are told 360 degree mein hata diya. Now, what is this 360 degrees? I mean, as I said, fundamentally the concept is right, 360 degree. But the manner in which it is being implemented in Government of India, less said the better about it. Because it is very unfortunate that officers who've done so well for 25, 30 years suddenly find themselves useless, and they're not even told what is wrong with them. I mean, there should be a conversation with an officer who served you for 25. It requires time, effort. Probably we don't have that time, that effort, which we should have for such senior officers in the government.
Yeah, and there is no transparency, sir, because a lot of officers were telling us, we keep talking to them. So, there are rivalry, there are peers also. So, you don't really know that what exactly goes wrong.
Unfortunately, in 360 degree, I have yet to come across people talking to the officers junior to the one who's being considered.
Yes.
360 degrees are about all. But I don't know they ever talked to. I mean, no one ever spoke to me about my boss. Or how do you rate your boss? 360 degrees, 360 degrees. It's very unfortunate the way 360, you find somebody inconvenient, you dump him.
So, sir, finally, just tell us something about your third book, and also, if you can just sum up the trilogy, how you thought that you would start writing your experiences as a civil servant, through a book, and you were just telling me that you initially thought that you would write one book, but now it's 3. So if you have plans of writing more on the same subject?
The first book was written because I'm a very avid reader. I read a lot. So I thought I should have a book of mine. I mean, I didn't have too many desires in life. One was, of course, writing a book. So I was working on that book while I was in service for a long time. I mean, I worked on it for 8 to 10 years, the first book. And it got published after I retired, obviously because I was critical of certain aspects of government. So it couldn't have been published before that. So I thought it would be over after that. But then, since I was interacting with a large number of civil servants, and I used to go to the academy to interact with them, I discovered one thing, that a number of officers were very enthusiastic when they joined the service. They wanted to do this, that, a lot of passion in them. And as they went up the ladder, when I spoke to officers 25 years plus, I found them, quite a few of them cynical, quite a few of them laid back. And the reason they gave was that these circumstances were such that they couldn't perform. They still wanted to perform. And they blamed a variety of institutions, including politicians, on their inability to do things. In order to counter that, I wrote Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant to illustrate and demonstrate to them that despite these set of circumstances, there are a large number of officers who are still doing very well. And they are getting a lot of recognition for what they're doing. It's not that. It's a different matter that we in our society, since we are fond of masala, we only talk of negative things. We don't talk about positive things. So that's how this second book came. Now the third book came for a very unusual reason. I was detected with cancer last year. So I was confined for 6 months, going through that treatment. It was a pretty bad time. So how do you utilize your time? I thought I'll write another book. And this was a book with a very definite purpose. I'd started a movement called Nexus of Good. And Nexus of Good primarily was to highlight good work that is happening around us. With so much negativity, I thought we must disseminate positive stories so that positive energy could grow and people could start believing that good work can happen because it is happening. So I decided to bring these stories in a book form. No more a civil servant when I am not a civil servant. Can I find examples both in the government and non-governmental domain where a lot of good work is happening? So this book, No More a Civil Servant, is about 50 odd stories of government and non-governmental organizations and individuals who've done fabulous work just to illustrate that despite this negativity, so much good work is happening. Many of us, officers and non-officers, can seek inspiration from these good work and probably replicate, scale, or do something similar to that. So that inspired me to write this book in an environment which could have been negative in the sense that I was physically down and out. I thought I will think positively, I'll write positively, and if I can convey positive signals, probably some people could benefit out of it, and that's how I wrote No More a Civil Servant.
Great. So, sir, thanks a ton. Thank you very much for having us here and taking time out for this interview. Thank you very much.